So through this project, I'm trying to explore what the connections are between death denial and environmental degradation. And so on one level, formaldehyde embalming is toxic to the environment. It's carcinogenic to people who are handling the fluids. We know that cremation is pretty energy intensive, and mercury is released into the air, which then it falls in our waterways and ends up back in our bodies. And casket manufacturing is pretty toxic. I think casket manufacturers are often on the list of the EPA's 50 most hazardous and toxic emitters. But then going a little bit deeper, the project also explores the idea that death denial is in some way fundamental to environmental degradation. The fact that we don't accept that we're physical beings, that we're mortal, is a denial of our connection to this kind of environmental system. And aside from the fact that it has kind of hippie intonations, there's a growing interest in these connections between the human body and environmental cycles. The CDC has a thing called the National Biomonitoring Program, and they're basically tracking the chemicals that end up in our bodies, and now they're studying, there's 212 chemicals that they're studying. And just to give you a factoid, flame retardants have been found in most of the bodies that they've tested. So pretty much all of us in this room have flame retardants in our bodies, and it's usually stored in fat. So there are 4 parts of the burial project, one of which is this Decompiculture Society. And I'll go into more detail later as the last speaker in this series. But there's a special mushroom, which I'll talk about. There's a burial suit, and there's a decompiculture kit that's kind of a conglomeration of different organisms and chemicals that are meant to facilitate decomposition. So I'll talk more about that later. But the Decompiculture Society's mission is to really promote and facilitate death awareness and death acceptance. And just to give you a little bit of a background, decompiculture is the cultivation of decomposing organisms, and it's a term that was coined by entomologist Timothy Miles. And he talks about it in terms of organisms helping us to create new food sources and to break down toxic chemicals. And the way I'm using it here, decompiculture, is kind of a more catch-all phrase for thinking about death in a different way and for thinking about death acceptance. So the society, I'm hoping, will have activities that are really meant to promote and to engage people in thinking about death and accepting death and what death denial means. And so we'll have workshops, we'll have field trips and lectures and other kinds of activities. And really the idea is to really also to kind of explore some of these connections between death denial and the body and the environment. So if you want to become a decomponaut, you can talk to me afterwards. We've passed out a survey. Feel free to fill that out and leave it for us to join. So to give you an overview, we have 4 speakers today, and then me. Joe Seehey from the Green Burial Council will go first, and then we'll have Emma Crossan and Nancy Acola from the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Eastern Mass, and then Paul Harrington, who's a licensed funeral director and the former manager of the Forest Hills Crematory. And then we'll have Ruth Fass from the Mourning Dove Studio, and Captain Brad White of New England Burials at Sea. And so after each presentation, we'll take 1 or 2 maybe brief questions, and then at the end we'll have a longer discussion and Q&A session.